H.P. Lovecraft was an American writer of cosmic horror and science fiction, best known for his creation of the Cthulhu Mythos, a shared universe of ancient and cosmic horrors that lurk in the shadows of human civilization. One of his most famous stories is the Call of Cthulhu, first published in 1928 in the pulp magazine Weird Tales 1. The story was written in the summer of 1926, inspired by one of Lovecraft's own dreams. The story is considered a classic example of Lovecraft's style of cosmic horror, which emphasizes the insignificance and vulnerability of humanity in the face of unknown and incomprehensible forces. The story also introduced one of Lovecraft's most iconic creations, Cthulhu, who has become a popular figure in pop culture, inspiring numerous adaptations, references, parodies, and tributes. However, the story was not widely recognized or appreciated during Lovecraft's lifetime. He died in poverty in 1937, having published most of his stories in pulp magazines that paid little and had limited circulation. It was only after his death that his friends and admirers began to promote his work and establish his reputation as one of the most influential writers of horror and weird fiction. The Call of Cthulhu was reprinted several times in various anthologies and collections, and became more widely available to readers. This video contained major spoilers. That being said, let's delve in. Thurston inherits the papers of his late great-uncle, Professor Angel, a scholar of ancient languages, who died mysteriously after being jostled by a strange sailor. Among the papers, he finds a locked box containing a weird clay sculpture and some notes, and clippings that hint at a cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. Thurston wonders who made the sculpture and what it has to do with his uncle's death. Thurston examines the clay sculpture and the papers in the box more closely. He finds that the sculpture depicts a monstrous creature with tentacles, wings, and scales, and that the papers are about a cult worshipping an ancient god named Cthulhu. He learns that the sculpture was made by a young artist named Wilcox, who had strange dreams of Cthulhu and his city under the sea. Wilcox brought the sculpture to Professor Angel, who became interested in his story and started to investigate the cult. Thurston continues to read the papers and learns that Professor Angel was intrigued by the strange words and symbols on the sculpture, which he recognized as belonging to an ancient and unknown language. He asked Wilcox about his connection to any secret cults or societies, but the young man denied any knowledge of such things. He only said that he had dreamed of the words and the creature after an earthquake, and that he felt compelled to make the sculpture. The professor then asked him to report his dreams every day, and Wilcox agreed. He told him of more visions of a sunken city of stone where Cthulhu lay sleeping, and a voice that repeated the words, Cthulhu Ftain, and R'lyeh. Thurston reads that Wilcox fell ill with a fever and delirium, during which he raved about a huge creature that walked or lumbered around. He also mentioned Cthulhu and R'lyeh again, but could not describe them clearly. He recovered on April 2nd and forgot all his dreams. Professor Angel, meanwhile, had asked many of his acquaintances to report their dreams to him, hoping to find some connection to Wilcox's visions. He found that most people had normal or no dreams, but some had vague and uneasy impressions of strange landscapes or something abnormal, especially between March 23rd and April 2nd. Thurston finds that Professor Angel had collected many press cuttings from around the world, reporting various incidents of madness, violence, and hysteria that occurred between February 28th and April 2nd. He also notes that some of the artists and poets who had reported their dreams to the professor had suffered terrible fates, such as insanity or death. He wonders if these events were somehow related to the dreams of Cthulhu and R'lyeh, but he dismisses the idea as absurd. He still thinks that Wilcox had somehow learned of the professor's research and tried to deceive him. Thurston tells how Professor Angel had first encountered the image and name of Cthulhu in 1908, when he met a police inspector named Legrasse at an archaeological meeting in St. Louis. Legrasse had brought a stone statuette of the monster, which he had seized from a voodoo cult in the swamps of Louisiana. He wanted to know the origin and meaning of the statuette, which had no resemblance to any known art style. The archaeologists were amazed and puzzled by the ancient and alien appearance of the statuette. Thurston describes the statuette in detail, noting its unnatural and unknown features and materials. He says that none of the archaeologists could identify its origin or decipher its writing, except for one man, Professor Webb, who had seen something similar in Greenland. He tells how he had met a tribe of devil-worshipping Eskimos who had a stone bas-relief of the same creature and writing, which they called Tornasuk. He says that he had copied the sounds of their rituals and recognized them as the same as those uttered by Wilcox in his dreams. Thurston recounts how Legrasse and Webb compared their findings and discovered that the words chanted by the Eskimos and the swamp cultists were the same, and that they meant, "In his house at R'lyeh dead Cthulhu waits dreaming." He then tells how Legrasse had raided the swamp cult after receiving a call for help from the terrified locals, who had heard and seen dreadful things in the night. He says that he and his men had to go deep into the dark and dismal swamp, where they heard the tom-toms and saw the devil flames of the voodoo ceremony. Thurston describes the horrors that Legrasse and his men witnessed in the swamp, where they found a cult of deformed and naked people dancing and howling around a fire and a stone pillar. On the pillar was the statuette of Cthulhu, and around it were the corpses of the missing locals. The cultists chanted the name of Cthulhu and his sunken city, and seemed to be in a frenzy of bloodlust and ecstasy. Thurston tells how Legrasse and his men broke up the cult ceremony and captured most of the participants, who were a mixed and degenerate lot of sailors and Buddhists. He says that they interrogated them and learned that they worshipped the Great Old Ones, ancient beings from outer space who had ruled the earth before man. They said that Cthulhu was their leader, and that he was sleeping in a sunken city until the stars were right for his return. They also hinted at some secret allies that came from the dark woods, but refused to say more. Only 2 of them were sane enough to be executed, and the rest were locked up in asylums. One of them, an old sailor named Castro, claimed to have visited other cults around the world. Thurston relates the legends that Castro had learned from the Chinese cultists, who had told him of the origin and nature of the Great Old Ones. He says that they were not made of matter, but of spirit, and that they came from the stars and built great cities on earth. He says that they were not dead, but only sleeping in their city of R'lyeh, waiting for the stars to be right again. He says that they communicated with their human followers through dreams, and taught them to worship them with idols and rituals. He says that when they would awaken, they would make mankind like them, and rule over a world of chaos and joy. He also mentions some black spirits of earth that came after R'lyeh sank, but he does not say much about them. He says that the cult was very secret and ancient, and that its headquarters was in Arabia, where a hidden city called Iram existed. He says that there were some hints of the cult in a forbidden book called the Necronomicon, written by a mad Arab. Thurston explains how Legrasse's story and statuette had caused a sensation among the archaeologists, but none of them could find any more information about the cult or its origin. He says that he still doubted Wilcox's sincerity, and thought that he had somehow learned of the cult and made up his dreams to fool his uncle. He says that he decided to visit Wilcox in Providence and confront him about his deception. He describes Wilcox as a dark and frail young man who lived in a shabby building and worked as a sculptor of grotesque and fantastic images. He says that he pretended to be interested in Wilcox's dreams and tried to get him to confess his trickery. Thurston was convinced of Wilcox's sincerity after talking to him and seeing his sculptures. He says that he thought Wilcox had subconsciously absorbed some information about the cult and expressed it in his dreams and art. He says that he became interested in the cult himself and went to New Orleans to meet Legrasse and the other witnesses. He says that he learned more details about the cult and its beliefs, and hoped to make a name for himself as an anthropologist by studying it. He says that he still did not believe in anything supernatural, and ignored the strange coincidences that suggested a connection between the dreams and the events. He also says that he began to suspect that his uncle had been murdered by the cult, because he had learned too much or was about to learn too much. He says that he fears for his own safety, because he has also learned much now. Thurston found an old newspaper article from Sydney, Australia, that caught his attention because of a picture of a stone idol like the one Legras had. He says that the article reported the arrival of a freighter that had towed a derelict yacht with a strange and violent history. He says that the yacht had been attacked by a schooner from New Zealand, whose crew had killed the yacht's crew of mixed-race men. He says that the only survivor of the schooner, a Norwegian named Johansen, had found the idol in the yacht's cabin and refused to tell more about his experience. Thurston was amazed and disturbed by the article, which seemed to confirm his uncle's research on the Cthulhu cult. He wonders about the mysterious events that happened at sea, and the connection between the idol, the island, and the yacht. He also notices the coincidence of the dates, and how they matched with the dreams of Wilcox and others, as well as with the earthquake and storm. He speculates that there was some sinister influence at work, related to the ancient beings that Castro had spoken of. He hopes that whatever it was only in the mind, and that it had ended on April 2nd. Thurston traveled to New Zealand and Australia to learn more about the cult and the yacht, but found little information. He says that he saw the idol in the Sydney Museum, and was struck by its alien material and origin. He says that he decided to go to Oslo to meet Johansen, the only survivor of the schooner, but found that he had died shortly after his return. He says that he got his widow to give him a manuscript that Johansen had written about his voyage, and that he read it on his way back to London. He says that it was a crude and vague account of the horrors that Johansen had faced, and that it made him dread the sound of the sea. Thurston read how Johansen's manuscript described his encounter with the sunken city of Horla, where Cthulhu and his followers lay sleeping. He says that Johansen and his men were amazed and terrified by the sight of the ancient and alien architecture, which was unlike anything on Earth. He says that Johansen felt the same sense of wrongness and distortion that Wilcox had felt in his dreams, and that he could not describe the city in any coherent way. He says that he was horrified by the idea of what lurked beneath the sea, and by the cult that wanted to awaken it. Thurston read how Johansen's manuscript described his exploration of the city of Horla, and how he and his men found a huge stone door with a carving of Cthulhu on it. He says that they managed to open the door, and were horrified by the darkness and stench that came out. He says that they saw Cthulhu himself emerge from the depths, a monstrous and indescribable creature that defied all laws of nature. He says that Johansen barely wrote of this sight, and that some of his men died of fear. He says that Cthulhu had awakened after eons of sleep, and that his awakening had affected the minds of sensitive people around the world. Thurston learned how Johansen escaped from Cthulhu, and how he lost most of his men in the process. He says that Cthulhu chased the alert, but Johansen rammed his yacht into the monster's head, causing it to burst and dissolve. He says that Cthulhu was not killed, but only temporarily dispersed, and that he began to reform behind them. He says that Johansen and Bryden were the only survivors, and that Bryden went mad from the sight. He says that Johansen was haunted by nightmares and visions until he was rescued by another ship, and that he did not dare to tell anyone what he had seen. He says that he wrote his manuscript as a way of coping, but hid it from his wife. Thurston finished reading Johansen's manuscript, and decided to keep it with his uncle's papers and the bas-relief in a tin box. He says that he wrote his own account of his investigation, and that he hopes no one will ever find it or put the pieces together. He says that he has seen the ultimate horror of the universe, and that he cannot enjoy life anymore. He says that he expects to die soon, like his uncle and Johansen, because he knows too much. He says that Cthulhu is still alive, but trapped under the sea, and that his cult is still active on Earth. He says that he does not know what will happen in the future, and that he does not want to think about it. He says that he hopes his manuscript will be destroyed if he dies,